Today is Wednesday, May 11th, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. Today, while I'm out for a walk, I'd like to take up a topic that I get asked about quite a bit, obviously, and I never really deal with it. And the question is how to get started in homeschooling, how to get started. And there's a ton of information that would need to be discussed, and every family's circumstances are different in some ways that affect the details of what can be done and what should be done. So I'd like to talk about some principles that I think that will be helpful in all situations and give some advice based on experience. My wife and I have homeschooled from the beginning. We have 10 children. Our oldest is 22 years old. Our youngest is 7 years old. So we've been homeschooling in some way, shape, or form for 22 years. Our oldest two children are in college, so we've been through everything from getting started in homeschooling to college admission, dealing with diplomas and transcripts, all that stuff. We've been through the whole process, and we've been through that process successfully. So I think I can speak confidently on what Catholic parents need to do to succeed in homeschooling. And I can get into the practical details as well, because that's where the rubber meets the road, and that's really where a lot of the confusion comes from. But there are important principles that need to be addressed that will solve questions and problems in a general way, and then we can always go into more detail in specific circumstances from family to family, which I'm happy to do. I often get the question, how do we begin? And parents will contact me when they've got young children. Usually their first child is in the preschool years, and they're interested in homeschooling, and they want to know, what should we do to get started? And we could be talking about kids that are 2 and 3 years old, 5 and 6 years old. But it's usually parents who are younger parents, haven't raised children yet, and they're dealing with their first child approaching the time for schooling, and they want to get off to a good start, as they should, of course. My first piece of advice for such parents is, you have to understand that laws regarding education differ from state to state. Some states are very friendly towards homeschooling. Some states are very distrustful. And you need to learn what the compulsory education laws are for your state. And the reason why, to make this very simple, some states may say that children need to begin their compulsory education at a younger age than other states. So one state might say age 7 is the year when education becomes compulsory for all children in the state. Well, if that's true, that compulsory education starts at age 7, you can do whatever you want until the child is 7 years old, and you shouldn't even worry about any state or formal schooling issues. But if you live in a state where the compulsory education laws apply to younger children, and you have to get started at a younger age, well, you need to make sure that you have things in order by that time. So the first piece of advice I would give you is, learn about the compulsory education law in your state and find out what the ages are for compulsory education. This is very important. When people talk about having to deal with the state and education and all this stuff, few of them realize that there are only certain years where this relationship between the child and the state is concerned. For example, here in North Carolina, the compulsory education laws apply to children ages 7 to 16. So any issues about state education requirements and things like that start when our children turn 7 years old, and they end when our children turn 16. We can do whatever we want as parents, but as far as the state requirements are concerned, it's just a window of time. It's just from 7 to 16. So during those core school years, we need to make sure we respect the laws and do what the state requires of us. And here in North Carolina, that's very, very little. But that's why I say my first piece of advice is find out what the compulsory education laws are for your state, what years are required for compulsory education, because you may be nowhere even close to where those laws begin yet, and you've got plenty of time and you can relax. So that's my first bit of advice. The second principle that I like to talk about in giving advice to parents who want to get started in homeschooling is you need to think about homeschooling in concentric circles. Concentric circles. And what that means is there's a small circle in the center, and then there's a larger circle around that circle, and a larger circle around that circle, and it keeps going on. Starting with a small circle, working out to larger and larger circles. In that center circle is not religion. In that center circle is not classical education, is not college preparation, is not vocational preparation. In that center circle are the state requirements for compulsory education. In that center circle, you have to know what's required of you by the state, and you have to get that done first. Many homeschool families like to play this game where they're the Christian who's persecuted by the state, and that's just complete baloney. You can go read in the New Testament, Romans chapter 13, and see that Christians are taught by the apostles to obey the government. Persecution means that the government is physically attacking people because of their religion. No one is experiencing that in America. Many people exaggerate their situations, and they pretend that any requirement by the state that they don't like is some kind of persecution. And this is just craziness. We're commanded by the apostles to obey the government. And when the government gives us rules and regulations for compulsory education, we have to satisfy those requirements. Homeschooled parents need to learn that if they will simply accept those rules and fulfill them, they'll never have a problem from the state. And that's the way that these things need to be handled. Many parents are worried about religion, they're worried about college admission, they're worried about vocational preparation, they're worried about all of these other cultural things, and in pursuing these 1,001 different things, they fail to cover the basics that are required by the state, and then they get frustrated and complain as if the state's bothering them, but they simply have things backwards. The way to start with homeschooling is to think in terms of concentric circles, and at the center, put the state requirements. Satisfy the state requirements first, and once you have the state requirements satisfied, you're going to be free to do anything else that you want. And that's the way to get rid of any anxiety or concerns in homeschooling. Many homeschool families, homeschool parents are anxious and stressed and frustrated because they're trying to do 1,001 different things, and they never take care of the one essential thing, which is the requirements of the state with regard to homeschooling. My advice to parents is take care of that first. Always make that the center circle. Take care of that first. Once you've satisfied the requirements of the state education laws, you can relax and pursue everything else with no problem. It's like people who don't pay their taxes. They're always walking around with this burden, thinking about taxes in the back of their mind, always have this feeling that taxes are due. You should do your taxes. You should work on the taxes. You should file your taxes. Always haunting them, always nagging them. And it vexes everything that they do. Instead of just taking care of that, getting it out of the way, and then pursuing everything else freely. We have to learn to satisfy our obligations first and free ourselves to pursue Christian ideals. So think of homeschooling as far as curriculum and goal setting. Think of it in terms of concentric circles, and the center circle is always, what does the state require of us? What do we have to do to satisfy the requirements of the state? If you get those things done as your first priority, you'll always have peace in your homeschooling experience, and you'll never have any trouble from the state or anything else. So make that the center and the first priority in homeschooling. So you're going to have to learn about the compulsory education laws and the homeschooling policies of your state. Like I said, some states are very friendly, very lenient towards homeschool families. Others are quite strict and require them to abide strictly by school standards. And wherever you live, you're going to need to learn how to get those things done. So that's principle number 2. Think in terms of concentric circles. Put the state requirements at the center. Satisfy them as efficiently as possible. And then you'll have peace of mind and a good conscience to go about other studies. Then you can add Catholic studies. Then you could add classical studies. Whatever other arts and extracurricular activities. All of that can be added as you move outward in those concentric circles. Sometimes you'll be busy and life will be crazy, and you're just going to need to focus on that first circle and make sure that the state requirements get taken care of. Other times you'll have all of that behind you, and you'll be free to focus on higher things. That's the way that you should handle planning and managing the homeschool. So that's principle number 2. Principle number 3 is that your family has to understand that homeschooling does not come first in a family. Business comes first. And I know people will say things like, oh, religion comes first. That's not true. That's not true, because religion doesn't make so great demands on us as we pretend it does. Religion is relatively simple to understand and to manage. Many people live chaotic lives, stressed out, making all kinds of bad decisions, and they pretend that religion is making them live that way, and it's simply not true. The Catholic life is not complicated. The Catholic life is not confusing. We don't need to spend all of our time thinking and talking about Catholicism, because Catholicism is quite simple. When we look at our family life, homeschooling is not the first thing. Our family business is the first thing. If a father's working to provide for his his professional work is the first thing, because if that's not in order, the entire family is in chaos. And so the first priority in the family is focusing on working, earning a living, paying the bills, and creating through that work the environment which is going to allow for a good homeschool experience. That environment has to be created. And the head of the household has to understand, if he's the provider for the family, as he should be, he needs to understand that his work, his secular employment, is going to make the environment available to his wife and children where homeschooling can succeed. He's going to provide that environment. And so his work is really the beginning and the end of an effective homeschool. He has to create and provide for that environment, and he has to do that throughout the years of his children's education. So really the beginning of an effective homeschool is effective provision for the family. And you can think of all of the issues that come up. Where are we going to live? What is our house going to be like? What kind of money do we have available for homeschool resources, services, activities? All of these questions depend on money. And so the beginning of priorities with regard to homeschooling is the business, the professional life of the head of the household that provides everything that's needed for homeschooling. And this has to be the concern of the head of the household. It has to be the concern of his wife, how she can do whatever she can to help her husband succeed in his work, not necessarily to go get a job herself, because that's often short-sighted, but to help her husband succeed. And then as the children grow up, they too should be raised to ask, how can we help Dad succeed? Because Dad provides for everything. And if we help Dad, it's often, I tell my children this all the time, it's easier for me to make money than it is for them. And so often when my kids need money, their first thought is to try to find a job or to do something. And I tell them, no, you need to relax, because it's easier for me to make $100 than it is for you to make $100. And for you to go out and try to find a way to make $100 isn't necessarily the best way to make $100. Maybe there's something you can do to help me that will allow me to go make $100, and we can work together as a family. So if there's a head of a household providing for the family, his wife and their children as they grow up need to understand that their prosperity as a family ultimately depends on the success of the work of the head of the household. And it's often better for the family to help the head of the household than to try to do 100 scattered things running in opposite directions, which usually bring all kinds of additional costs and expenses, and really there's not as much profit in the family. There may be more income, but there's not necessarily more profit, and it may actually not improve the family's conditions. So that's an issue that needs to be thought of. I think the best way to manage a household and to provide for an effective homeschool is for the family to understand that Dad is the head of the household. He bears the responsibility of earning a living. He's in the best position to earn a living. And if we all help Dad, we can actually help him earn a living. And that the benefits of his success trickle down to all the members of the family. And that's often the best way to go about seeking provision for the family. So I would say that the family has to put the professional life and work of the head of the household as the first thing and organize around that work. Mom can't make a schedule that's organized around her own activities because her activities are dependent upon the head of the household. The children can't have a homeschool schedule that's just drawn up from whatever homeschool mother or some curriculum program says the schedule can be, because everything is determined by the activities of the head of the household. He's the head. The body operates in union with the head. And many homeschool families neglect this, and mom takes homeschooling as some kind of mandate to do whatever she pleases, or to do whatever the other homeschool moms are doing, or whatever the homeschool publisher says to do. And mom is running in one direction, justifying everything she does by homeschooling, and the father is left on an island by himself to go and try to figure out how to pay for everything with a family that's in disorder. And for every step forward that they take 2 steps backwards, and there's money dissipated and blown all over the place, and the family simply doesn't function like a family, and they justify that by saying, oh well, we homeschool. Homeschooling has nothing to do with bad household management. So my third principle that I'd recommend for families getting started is make sure you have your household ordered, and that it's ordered around the head of the household. Make sure that everyone is aligned with a common mission, and realize that the success of the father's business work is in the end going to determine what's possible for the homeschooling activities. So that's my third piece of advice. Fourth is, in light of that, to develop a family schedule, a family routine. And I would say that this is really the work of a homeschooling mother. When I asked my wife before I started this talk, I said, hey Dania, if I'm going to talk about getting started in homeschooling, is there anything that sticks out in your mind as something important to talk about? And this is what came to her mind as the most important thing. What she does as a homeschooling mother is she types up a schedule for the family. And what she does is she uses either an Excel worksheet or a Word document. Of course, you could do this in a notebook, but she sets it up with a column for each member of the family. So starting on the left, she'll have a column for me, and then a column for her to the right of that, and then she'll go on with these columns with each member of the family's schedule written out. And so on the far left, she'll have the hours of the day written, and then a column for each member of the family. And what she'll do in that schedule is she'll write out my schedule, listing all of the normal events of my day and the times for those events. And we'll begin ordering the household based on my regular schedule. So once she's got my schedule written out, then she'll look to the second column where she's listed, and then she'll draft out her schedule based on my schedule, and then she'll continue that for each of the children in the family. In each column, she'll write out each person's daily schedule. And the reason why she does this is so that she, as the homeschooling mother who's really responsible to manage the household each day throughout the week, she can have a bird's eye view over everything that's scheduled for every member of the family, and she can make sure that everything is feasible, everything is actually possible based on the schedule. So when this schedule is developed, it's going to determine what can be done in the homeschool. It's going to determine what the children should do and when, based on other things going on in the house. For example, she's got to make dinner at a certain time. The time she makes dinner is dependent upon the time that I'm available for dinner. The time that she wraps up for bed is dependent on the time that I'm available to go to. We try to schedule times to make life pleasant as well, so we have time to be together in the midst of all of our work. And then she looks across and she can see what the kids are doing at different times and whether that aligns with other things that are going on, so we can develop an effective schedule for the entire family and keep that all in view. The children, as they grow up, go through different phases, as it were, and something of a standard schedule develops for children in each of those phases. So, for example, if we have a preschool-aged child who doesn't need to be in school, there will be a certain schedule for that child or for those children, if it's more than one. And then we may have an elementary-aged student, and there's going to be a basic schedule for an elementary school-aged student, and then a middle school-aged student or a high school student will have a different schedule, and those things will all be mapped out on this family schedule. And we'll get used to those things over time, and we'll get an idea of what windows of time are available for different activities, what windows of time are available for study, what windows of time need to be used by giving the kids some recess time, and what activities can be done during those recess times based on what other activities are going on at the same time. It allows a family-wide schedule to be developed, and rather than sit there with a blank sheet of paper and say, what should we do for homeschooling? Many of those questions about homeschooling will be answered by the family schedule and what's actually possible based on what the family needs to do every day, starting with dad and working from dad down through the children. Much of the confusion of what to do for homeschooling will be eliminated if that family schedule is put together first. So the mother can see what time is actually available for homeschool studies, and when other tasks have to be done, when other activities need to be taken care of. And the question that always comes up is, how many hours a day should we devote to homeschooling? And the answer is as many as possible. That's going to be determined by your family schedule. How many hours you can homeschool is not for you to decide as if it's arbitrary, but how many hours you can work on homeschool studies is going to be determined by your responsibilities in life and this family schedule. For example, in some families, dad works outside the home, and his business life has nothing to do with his wife or children. He leaves in the morning and he comes home in the evening. And that's it. Taxes are simple because he's just got W-2 forms to submit, files his taxes in a few minutes, and business is very simple. Business consists of dad leaving and coming home at the end of the day. In other families, a father may be self-employed, and his wife may be his secretary. His wife may have to take calls during the day. His wife may handle billing or paperwork and taxes and things like that. And so A wife who's married to a self-employed man is going to have activities and responsibilities to attend to through the day that have to be taken care of. And this is made possible by this family schedule. Mom can schedule certain times to take calls or certain times to do paperwork. And as long as she gets that mapped out, she can then look at her availability and what her schedule looks like, and she can plan the kids' homeschool activities based on her responsible daily schedule, helping her husband with the family business. In other families, a mother may actually work on her own to earn income, by 1,000 different means. But the point here is that the family schedule, a responsible, realistic family schedule, needs to be laid out, because that's what's actually going to determine how much time mom or dad can devote to homeschool activities. And that's going to answer the questions: how much time should we devote to homeschooling? What should we do? How much should we study? How should we study? Those questions are not answered by different homeschool programs. Those questions are not arbitrary to just be decided by a homeschool mother. And again, this is where homeschool mothers make great mistakes, and where homeschooling becomes a detriment or harmful to the family. To do this wisely, the family schedule, a responsible family schedule, should be established first. And then the parents should look at the available time slots for homeschool activities, and then they can schedule based on priorities, using that idea of the concentric circles that I just talked about, what they should do in those available time slots. If there's not much time available, then you may have to devote all the time you have to just get state requirements done. You may have to use Sunday afternoons for religion classes with the kids. That may be all you can do. There are consequences of the reality of your circumstances in life and what time is available. And you'd be much better off working within your real life schedule than setting up some unrealistic plan for homeschooling that's simply never going to get done. And you'll notice that most homeschool families, spend all of their time talking about curriculum, constantly changing things, constantly starting and stopping different programs, because they just don't have a realistic plan. They're trying to have a homeschool schedule before they even have a family schedule, and it doesn't work. So you're going to need to establish a family schedule, and then once that schedule is established, you have the ability to look realistically at what's possible for your homeschooling. You may find that the way your family works simply doesn't allow for much homeschooling, and you're going to have to be content with that, or find some creative solutions. You may find that decisions in life that you previously thought were just sort of random have a significant impact on your homeschooling. And maybe some changes need to be made in life to improve what's possible for the education of your children. A good example in my life was that as my children got into schooling age, my oldest was 8 years old when I chose to leave the classroom, stop working away from home, and start my own business. I started my own business, or I desired to start my own business for the overall benefit that it would bring my family, and how it would allow our family to more effectively raise our children. For me to leave the house every day at 7:30 in the morning and come home at 5 o'clock, that was not ideal for the education of our children and the family culture that we wanted to develop. And so I chose to leave classroom teaching and start my own business. And I've run that business now for almost 15 years. So you can see that there's a lot of decisions that we make professionally that have more to think about than how much money is available from this job or that job, or what other benefits might be available, material benefits. These decisions and options we have professionally may affect our ability to educate our children. We may have the resources and skills to be self-employed and work from home, and that may radically affect what's possible through homeschooling. There are many things to consider like that, many different things. Where we live, what kind of neighborhood we live in, what kind of house we live in, the hours we work, how we work, what kind of careers we choose, on and on. All of these decisions affect what's possible in homeschooling. When I was a classroom teacher, many people look at teaching as a profession and they say, oh, well, teachers don't get paid very well. And that's really silly, because one thing that people don't tend to think about with teaching is that teachers only work 180 days a year. You may not get a lot of money in teaching, but you get a lot of time. And that time can be used to really ramp up the quality of your family's life without the need for money. Whereas one of the reasons why people need more and more money is because they have to pay for everything that they want, because they don't have any time to do it themselves. So the reason I'm sharing that is because there are lots of different issues to consider as you make professional decisions in life and family decisions about where you should live, how you should live, where you should work, what kind of work you should do. There are many other considerations that need to go into those decisions. And mapping out a family schedule and thinking about your family life practically and in detail at that level, and working to get everything in your family aligned with your family goals is what's going to allow you to actually achieve those goals. So the family schedule is what allows you to align your family like this, and over time to continually make improvements, to find spots in the schedule where things don't work, to find spots or situations in your life where things just don't come together, and to target those problem areas and improve them, and to be constantly fixing and improving your family life. To do that, you're going to need this bird's eye view of the family schedule to see how everything that's done affects everyone else, so you can make responsible decisions and do things in sustainable ways. So those are some general principles, and what I want you to see is, if those things are established, if those things are worked out, all of the confusion of homeschooling, all of the uncertainty of homeschooling goes away, and the decisions that need to be made become very simple. The Classical Liberal Arts Academy is designed to serve homeschool families that live in this way. It's not meant for the chaos crowd that's just looking for stuff to buy or activities to keep people busy. It's not intended for unsuccessful homeschool families that don't know what they're doing. It's not intended to be just one of a million different homeschool programs. The Classical Liberal Arts Academy is designed to serve families who have their act together, who have these basic principles in view, who have their household in order, and are looking to work in light of this concentric circles model, to start with the mandatory state requirements, and then to expand from there into more and more advanced studies. The Classical Liberal Arts Academy is the only homeschool program that's designed to serve families in this way and allow families to use the program in flexible ways that serve their own unique family circumstances. So when you look at the Classical Liberal Arts Academy and you see how different things seem, this is why the things are so different. We start first of all by seeking to order our families wisely, and then to develop a homeschool program that effectively serves wise homeschool families. What you'll see in most homeschool circles is just people buying stuff. It's just a glut fest of products. They're all disconnected. They have no relation to one another. There's no real plan. There's no family order. And homeschooling is just used to justify chaotic, ugly living. And we're not interested in participating in that ugly market. We're not interested in making a profit off of a way of life that's imprudent and unsustainable, that doesn't yield happy results in the long run. We actually prefer to explain to families how they should think about homeschooling, how it should be subject to the overall responsibilities of their families, and then once they have their life in balance and in order, then understand how to use our program and how our program is designed to serve a well-ordered family. So these are some basic principles to help families get started in homeschooling. Once you have these things in place, homeschooling itself is not complicated. It's difficult, but it's not complicated. It's also not expensive. Many families spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars stupidly. What they do makes no sense, and you've got homeschooling mothers that really just blow their husbands' money on things that are unnecessary and unproductive. There's no need for that. Homeschooling can be very affordable, it can be very efficient, it can be very simple, but it is difficult. There are a couple reasons why it's difficult, and the difficulties of homeschooling need to be discussed, because this is a whole separate issue for the lives of homeschooling parents. They have to learn how to handle this work of homeschooling. I always tell people homeschooling is greatly underestimated. The challenge of homeschooling is very great. It's spiritual warfare. It's Christian missionary life. It's very difficult. If you think about what parents are undertaking in the work of homeschooling and how important that work is, it can't be emphasized enough that this is difficult work. And there's a couple reasons why it's so difficult. First of all, most parents are not experienced teachers. They may want to teach their children certain subjects that they've never studied before. And when you have no teaching experience, as with any other art or skill, you simply don't know what you're doing. You don't know what it feels like to do it right. You don't know what it's supposed to look like. You don't know the timetable for how things are supposed to be done in time. And that lack of experience can cause homeschooling to become very frustrating, not only to the parents but also to the children. Because if the children feel like it's chaotic and things don't make sense, they get frustrated. They get vexed by the confusion and the disorder. and that needs to be avoided. And it's hard to avoid that confusion when parents don't have teaching experience and they don't know what to do. And that's why I tell parents, another one of the advantages in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy is that we're here and able to help you with these things. I have over 20 years of full-time teaching experience at your disposal. The same is true of my wife. We can help you by sharing our experience and helping you to understand the different problems and issues and how you should approach things practically on a day-to-day level. And we can help you from day one all through your homeschooling years until you start to get experience and see how things work, and then you can manage things on your own without that vexation. So one of the first challenges with homeschooling is that parents don't have teaching experience. Both my wife and I had teaching experience before we ever homeschooled. And that makes a great difference in our ability to manage the education of our children. Secondly, homeschooling is long. You're going to be educating your children from the time they're 2 and 3 years old into their adulthood. You're going to have 15, 16 years of homeschooling activity. It's a long time. And homeschooling parents need to learn how to think about things in this time frame. It's a long time that the goals of homeschool are to be pursued. And again, it's hard for parents to think about that when they haven't experienced it yet. They haven't been through that whole cycle and done all of that work. They really don't know what it feels like. They don't have any frame of reference to judge whether they're doing well or whether they're on track. Parents will often write to me and ask, you know, we've been studying for 2 years. How are the kids doing? Are the kids making good progress? And you can see the parents are saying, like, we really don't know what this is supposed to feel like. We don't understand the time frame. And that's an important issue that has to be understood. Parents need to learn how to manage homeschooling because it's a long game. It's a long-term activity with long-term goals. And there are many bad days, there are many bad months, there are some bad years. Kids go through different phases in life. Kids struggle at different times. There are times where the kids are very stubborn and don't want to study, don't want to do things. There are times in life where mom is pregnant or mom is nursing babies and there's lots of little kids in the house and it's just chaotic. And parents have to know how to play the long game in homeschooling. And it takes a great deal of patience. It takes a great deal of patience. And one thing I always tell parents is there's plenty of time. There's plenty of time. This is about years and years and years of study and work. There's plenty of time. The family has to take care of responsibilities. The family has to take care of family obligations. The family has to deal patiently with all kinds of interruptions and disturbances through the years. We go through different phases of life. For example, my wife and I, we had 10 children between 2000 and 2014. So that period, those 14 or 15 years where my wife was having babies, our life was very chaotic. And since 2014, my wife hasn't been pregnant again, and it appears that our childbearing years are over, and our life now is very different than it was in 2010, for example. I don't have a pregnant wife anymore. I don't have a nursing wife. I don't have any toddlers in the house. We're not changing any diapers. There's no breastfeeding. I have a wife who is completely free to work, who's able to work with the kids full-time with no distractions. And I didn't have that 10 years ago. And so we go through phases as a family. Family life phases change. And all of these things need to be kept in mind as we work through homeschooling. Homeschooling your first child will be the most difficult of all. After that, first of all, you'll have experience, but it gets easier and easier as it goes on. But parents need to learn to play the long game and to be practical with regard to this long game, just like I recommend parents drafting out a family schedule. Parents also need to take time to sit down and set goals. If you have a child who's 5 years old, you can say, well, Thomas is 5 years old, and, normally his education is going to go on until he's 18 years old or so, and then he's going to be free to start making decisions about what he wants to do with his adult life. So let's map out goals for ages 5 through 18. Let's start with the long-term goals. What do we want to be true for our son's education when he's 18 years old? Let's make a list of goals for our son's education. And these shouldn't be wishy-washy goals. These should be clear goals. We want our son to have read the whole Bible through at least one time. We want our son to have memorized the Baltimore Catechism. We want our son to have received the sacrament of confirmation. We want our son to have completed college preparatory mathematics. Whatever the goals may be, sit down and make a list of the long-term goals for your homeschooling with your children, and then work back from there. If these are our long-term goals for when our son is 18 years old, what will he need to have completed when he's 15 if he's going to complete those things when he's 18? What things does he need to have completed when he's 12 if he's going to complete those things at 15? What things does he need to have completed at 9 or 7 or 6? And you can map that progress backwards from those long-term goals. This is called reverse engineering. And that's how you can understand as a parent, what do we need to do this year? What do we need to do this week, this month, today, this hour? It starts with those long-term goals. And that's something that a husband and wife need to give good attention to. They need to study to know how to set those goals. They need to pray about those goals. They need to talk through those goals, because you can't do everything. You're going to have to choose what you're going to be good at and what you're not going to be good at. You can't do everything. You're going to have to prioritize, and the goals that you set, they have to be possible together. You can't have one goal undermining another goal. And so it takes some work to set quality goals, realistic goals. And then once you have those goals in view, reverse engineer that education, and that's how you start to get short-term objectives or milestones that need to be aimed at throughout your children's education. And you have to make sure that these goals and these milestones are realistic, or else you'll just torment yourself. So understand that homeschooling is a long game that needs to be played, and you need to start with long-term goals and work back to short-term goals. And if you continue to do that, you can work back all the way down to daily tasks and a daily schedule for what needs to be done. There's an article that I wrote, you can find it on the Academy website. The title is How to Create a Schedule, and it explains that process in more detail. So you have to understand that homeschooling is long. There's lots of time. You have over 10 years to work with your children. All kinds of stuff is going to come up along the way. You're going to go through different phases of life as a family. You have to prepare yourself mentally for all of these different things, so that when they come, you're not caught by surprise. Your plans don't become unsustainable. You don't become vexed and frustrated and miserable. But you know these things are coming. You know that changes are coming. You're going to have to go through puberty with your children. And again, as a first-time parent raising the first child, you don't know what's coming. No matter how confident you are in yourself, you don't know what's coming. You don't know how wearisome it can be. There are dark days. There are dry periods. There are days where you feel like you need to quit, and you don't need to quit. But you need to learn how to cope with those things, how to stay focused on your long-term goals, and to be patient in homeschooling. You have a long time. You know the saying, Rome wasn't built in a day. You have to keep that in mind as you work in homeschooling. So understand the time frame for homeschooling. That's another important key to success in homeschooling. So in this talk, I've gone into quite a number of important issues, and I'm sure that there's plenty for you to think about and start working on. What I recommend is that you do that. You start working on these general principles and these key points that I've talked about, and then as you start to see the details of your own family situation, your own children, your own homeschooling challenges or also advantages, you'll start to get specific questions. You'll start to see specific issues that need to be addressed. And those are the questions and issues that we should talk about. So what I recommend is, having listened to this, maybe re-listen to it, start working through these things, and then start discovering those specific questions and issues that pertain to your own family. And if you'd like to talk about them, get in touch and pass those questions on to me, and we can try to help you to work out the details of these general ideas in your own family's life based on your own unique circumstances, so that you can enjoy a successful time homeschooling. My wife and I have had many difficult days. We've had many difficult times, and looking back in hindsight, we realize that we exaggerated a lot of the difficulties we had. We took for granted a lot of the benefits that our children gained through homeschooling. And looking back in hindsight, both my wife and I would say that we wouldn't have done anything differently. We couldn't have done anything differently. And things have turned out very well for us. Our adult children are doing well. They've transitioned to adult life quite well. Of course, there's all kinds of obstacles that we continue to work on, all kinds of character issues and details that we continue to work on as their parents with our adult children. And all of the experience that we gained in raising and teaching them now trickles down and benefits our younger children. And our experience with homeschooling overall has been awesome. We have a very close family. Like I said, I wouldn't change anything. But there were definitely some difficult times, especially when we were doing a lot of things on our own without much encouragement, without much support, without anyone to turn to for advice. Those times were difficult, and I hope that we can help you to avoid those times by being available to help. So get started with these general principles. Start to see the specific issues in your life that are going to need to be dealt with, and then let's talk about them and see how we can help you to find solutions for your unique circumstances so that you can enjoy a successful homeschool. I hope that's helpful. God bless.